Welcome back to Why We Buy It. Today I want to talk about a watch that most every YouTuber talks about at some point on their channel if they cover watches. And this particular watch is, again, one of the watches in my collection, and it's one of the most affordable watches in my collection, but at the same time, one of the most impressive. I'm talking about a Column Wheel Chronograph that you can get for less than $200 American. And if you haven't guessed yet, the watch I'll be talking about today is the Seagull 1963. Now, I'm sure the majority of you have probably watched videos already on the Seagull 1963, and there are a number of things about it that probably everyone knows is commonplace now, right? We'll get into the dimensions in a bit, but we're talking about a Swiss-designed column wheel chronograph that the Chinese purchased both the plans and equipment to make and began making these watches in actually 1962, but it's got the 1963 moniker because that's when they went into full distribution in their military. This was meant to be a Chinese Air Force chronograph. Now, there's all sorts of things that people will talk about when it concerns the history and the movement and such, but I really want to get into that. What I really want to get into is what makes this watch special and impressive and why I bought it. And the first thing I'll say is that I get more questions and compliments on this watch than any other watch in my watch box. You've already seen a number of the watches in my collection if you follow the channel. And you'll know that this kind of sits a little bit toward the lower end of cost of the pieces I have, and it really gets the most attention from both watch enthusiasts and just the average person alike. And when I say watch enthusiast, I'm not just talking about people who collect watches. I'm also talking about people who work in the industry. Okay, so I'll tell you a quick story, and this happened just recently. This was last week, actually. I was walking with Amy down Yonge Street and happened across a store that's a little bit north of Eglinton that I'd never been to before. It's a jewelry store, small shop, but it obviously had a number of very interesting watches in the window, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to take a pop in and see what they have, see if they've got anything interesting, which they actually did. And I was wearing this watch that day. And I was looking at a Baume & Mercier, a very, very beautiful sort of dress piece that had a skeletonized section that ran from the center of the watch down to both the 7 and the 5. So it had a little triangle cutout that was skeletonized so you could see a bit of the movement. It was a hand winder. The back was a fully open case back so you can see the entire movement. Very pretty watch for demonstration purposes, and very similar to this in that regard, in that this watch is always one that people take interest in because of that display case back and that manual wind movement, and that column wheel chronograph and all the intricate parts that go into it. So I was looking at that watch, and they also had a very nice looking Panerai. I hadn't tried a Panerai in quite some time, so I thought I'd throw it on risk, get a good look at it. I'm always tempted by Panerai, but I never really pull the trigger. They always seem a little bit bulky, right? This was a titanium model, so it actually felt lighter on wrist, and if I was to go Panerai, maybe that's the way I'd go. But anyways, I'm looking at these watches, and I'm with the salesperson there, and the owner comes out from the back because he hears me talking with the guy, and I obviously know what I'm talking about, and he notices this watch on my wrist. And he immediately asked about it. He's like, that's a good looking watch. What watch is that? So I kind of, I leaned my wrist forward so he could take a look. And he's like, oh, Chinese made, eh? He's like, I think I've seen that before. I said, yeah, it's the Seagull 1963. It's a very popular watch amongst collectors. It's not a very expensive watch. And I took it off and I let him see the display case and everything. And he was looking it over and he's like, wow, it's a really impressive watch, right? He was taken by it. When I told him, you're talking like a couple $100 for this watch, he's like, you gotta be kidding me. And I said, no. All right, and he said, honestly, you'd be hard pressed to see the difference between it and some of the models they carried that were into the thousands. And that's what initially appeals to people, is that you're getting a watch that by all means should be more expensive. It really should, right? But because it's made en masse by a number of different companies in China that all produce a similar looking model, the classic sort of 1963 design, there are, of course, many watches that utilize the movement and have a similar dial, only with different colors, maybe in a panda, what have you, but basically it's the internals are the same, they're just changing the outer appearance of the watch. But this particular model is the one that most people gravitate to because of the history and everything behind it. I actually gravitated to it because of the look of it. I love the look. This is a watch that, for all purposes, can be worn as a dress watch, right? Has some polished surfaces. I mean, it's not high polish, but they're polished. That face with that almost gold tone, right? Somewhere between champagne and gold tone dial with the gold indices and then the red and the dark blues and such. It's just, it matches so much, but at the same time, it's so striking when it's on your wrist. And that's also why it gets so much attention from others. And I'm talking, that's one story. I can tell you another time where I was down at VizTech here in Toronto. VizTech is one of the premier photography and videography stores in all of Toronto. It's also one of the best places to rent high-end equipment if you want to do something special in the videography department. But I was down there actually looking for some lenses for a couple of my cameras, and I'll be doing some additional videos on this channel about some of the camera equipment and such that I use to make these videos. But the guy I was talking with was wearing a Seiko Willard, and I was wearing this. And during our conversation, he noticed it. He said, "Wait a minute, what watch is that?" I said, "Oh, it's the Seagull 1963. He's like, "Can I see it?" I said, "Sure." Showed it to him. He said, "I see you're wearing a Willard." He's like, "Yeah, you're a watch guy too." I said, "Yeah." He's like, "You know, I've read about these watches. I've seen them on videos. I've never seen one up close." He's like, "Up close, they're even more impressive." And I said, "I agree with you," right? It's a watch that, even though it's a Chinese-made watch that you can order through AliExpress, you know, on their AliExpress sales and get a great deal on it, when you look at it up close, it passes all the eye tests you're going to give it. Now, when you really look closely at the movement, you're going to notice that some of the pieces aren't as refined as you'd see on, say, a Swiss-made watch, right? Some of the little rotors and teeth look a little bit rough-edged, but for the most part, you're not looking at this under a loupe, right? You're looking at it and admiring the intricacy and the complication of designing a watch like this and having it run, in this case, flawlessly for a few years, right? I've had this watch for a while. Now, I have heard and seen on forums and such where every now and then people will get a lemon, but what I'll say to that is I've seen these watches for sale on, say, AliExpress. I actually bought mine from Amazon, but I've seen them on AliExpress, and they can range in price from, at sometimes, just under $100 to, you know, $250. And it's from a number of different sellers. And like anything else, in my opinion, you're probably getting what you paid for. Okay? Like any of the movement companies, although the Chinese movement companies aren't going to talk about it as much, but I mean, if you were to buy an ETA movement or Sellita movement, there's different levels of the same movement. You can get an absolute base movement up to a movement that is, you know, chronometer specified of the same movement. And that's because the level of work and finishing and quality control they put into each movement affects the price. It's the same thing with the Chinese movement manufacturer, exact same thing with Seagull, right? If they want to crank out some base movements for some other companies that want to put together versions of the 1963, they can do that. But at the same time, they can also spend a little extra time and a little more quality control producing movements for companies that they have direct deals with that they trust to do a high quality product, or of course their own products. So you do get what you pay for. If this is a watch that you're interested in, I would say look for something in the, you know, $150 to $200 range, and you're probably going to get a good product, right? Or buy from a company like Amazon, like I did, where if something's wrong with it, you just send it back, right? If it doesn't look perfect in the beginning, you get another one. So that's the route I went. But it's the fact that as somebody who collects watches and who appreciates the history and who appreciates what goes into them, having people ask me about a specific watch is a bonus, right? It's one of the reasons I choose the watches I do. It's one of the reasons why I'm wearing the Alpina Pilot Heritage right now, right? I did the video on this. If you haven't seen it yet, I'm going to put a link to it. But it's a watch that not only is it interesting when it's on, but when it comes off the wrist, it's just as interesting. And that's what this particular watch gives you. That movement, that column wheel chronograph movement, is so impressive. It just has you looking at it constantly, right? This is a watch that when I choose which watch I'm going to wear in the morning for my watch box, I'll spend an extra 30 seconds winding the watch back to full and admiring the movement. That's something I don't do with a lot of my other watches, right? It really isn't. So what this watch gives you that the majority of affordable watches don't is a watch that is just as appealing off your wrist as it is on. A watch that you can admire from every angle and be amazed by that particular movement. Of course, there are watches that have much more elaborate and jeweled, finished movements, but the way the movement operates isn't really that much different, right? You get to see the inner workings of the movement. In this case, it being a column wheel chronograph, you get that satisfying click when you start the timer. And you get to see it actually engage when you're looking through the case back, right? This is a movement that you can enjoy over and over and over again, not on wrist. And there are a lot of watches out there in the affordable range that come with display case backs that the display case back really doesn't add anything to the watch, at least to someone like myself. I can't tell you how many watches I've owned or seen with the Seiko 4-hour movement in them with the display case backs. The Seiko 4-hour movement is about as boring as it gets when it comes to a movement. It's a workhorse movement. It's a great movement. I have no issue with the Seiko 4-hour movement being in a, like say, a micro brand watch that I purchased because I know it's going to work. But do I really care to see it through a display case back? No, I don't. There's not that much that's impressive about it, right? If it happens to be your only watch with a display case back, then there's a certain, appeal to seeing the rotor move and such and seeing how it winds. But once you've seen a few of them, it gets pretty stale, right? Same thing goes with even some of the Swiss movements. I'm talking about, like, say, an ETA 2824 or a 2892 or a Sleeta 200, what have you. I mean, these are movements that once you've seen a couple of them, they really lose their appeal. There isn't that much that's special about them. Now, you can get into the higher level of those particular movements, and maybe they'll have a few additional jewels and, some perlage or whatever, some additional finishing, and that might be appealing to a certain extent, but it still doesn't have that same appeal as watching a column wheel chronograph engage. And if you want to do that with a display case back, you're generally spending over $1,000 to do it. Just not with the Seagull 1963. It's that a movement like this, which was designed in the 50s, right? In the 50s, without computers or anything like that, can function a watch like this quite accurately and have it last for years if it's well taken care of. That's what blows us away. And generally, the kind of watch that you only admire off wrist requires some significant investment, right? I'm talking about the kind of movements that just draw you in on watches that you're going to wear selectively, okay? Lange Glashütte Original, right? We're talking high horology pieces with exquisitely beautiful movements. But for less than $200, you can get a taste of that with the Seagull 1963. That's why So many YouTube channels talk about it. That's why so many collectors have one in their collection. Okay, so let's get into the case sizing. Now there are a number of different case sizes available for this particular model, right? They've gone with a few that are a little bit larger, but I stuck to the sort of original dimensions when it comes to case size, and that's the 38 millimeter, which is actually closer to around the, if I can get it here, yeah, about 37 and a half, really. And the height will be affected on mine because the actual true to form model is a, let me get this here, domed acrylic, which sits a bit higher than this. I went for the domed sapphire just for wearability's sake, visibility's sake, and, you know, anti-scratch. So I'm at about 13 and a half. The dome will be slightly larger. You saw it on my wrist. This actually fits well. If I measure it from crown to case, it's around 40. Now, let me get it here. Yeah, pretty close to 40, right? So it's going to look pretty good on the majority of wrist sizes. I have a 7¼ inch wrist, but I have a very flat top wrist, like I'm wearing a 44 millimeter Alpina right now, and it looks okay, right? So on my wrist, this may look a little small. I still like the look of it because, again, it's almost more of a dressy piece than a pilot's watch. And I would feel that this particular model would look good on anything from like a 6¼ to a 7½ inch wrist, no problem. The lug to lug is a little bit longer than your typical 38 millimeter, right? Well, it's about 46 and a half, really. So it does fit the majority of wrists well, like I said, right? And the strap that goes on this is an 18 millimeter strap. So, I mean, a lot of the men's watches come with a 20 or 22 millimeter strap. So you might not have a lot of straps that match this, but 18 millimeters is a standard size. They're easy enough to find lots of places. So for the majority of people, it's a pretty good fit, right? Especially if you're wearing it as like a daily driver, or in some cases, a dress watch. It's a great fit, and it slides under a cuff real well. So as I had mentioned earlier, there's one last thing I want to say about this particular watch. And you could see it as a positive or a negative, depending on the individual. And that's because it's an inexpensive watch with a very complicated movement that costs more to service than it would to buy a new watch in most cases. This is not a watch that you're probably going to pass down from generation to generation. This is not a watch that's going to develop some sort of family heritage with you, right? It's a watch that you're going to enjoy while you have it, and at some point will probably end up in the trash, which goes against what a lot of watch enthusiasts, especially mechanical watch enthusiasts, sort of believe in. Right? One of the things that appeals about this particular hobby is that you're admiring pieces that were made with design and precision to last, unlike most everything that's made nowadays, that is made to eventually fail and be replaced. Real high horology timepieces are designed to stand the ages, right? To stand the test of time. You take care of them, they'll take care of you. That's the idea. This is a watch that, although you could do that with, would be very costly and maybe not cost effective to do so. So that's something you got to consider. But I look at it like I have my 6 watch collection. It always stays at around 6 watches. Some watches I will eventually sell. Others, like this one, may eventually just die. But there are watches in my collection that will remain, will always be a part of it. And those are the watches that will gain some heritage. The others are watches that I can personally enjoy and admire and wear for while I have them. This is one of those. Who knows, maybe I'll sell it. I actually have a video coming up relatively soon on how I select which watch I'll be selling next in my collection to to add a new watch to it. And I do have a trip to Sweden coming up. I plan on seeing a couple of the micro brands there. And if one of those watches really interests me, I'm going to have to remove something from the watch box. This might be it. It might be something else. Could be the watch I'm wearing. I don't know. But I'll let you know in a future video. So be sure to subscribe, click the notification bell, and if you enjoyed the video, let us know in the comments. And if there's something you want to know about in particular, ask me in the comments. We get back to every single person who messages us. Till next time.